Firstly, to make you aware that we're recording it, partly because this seemed to be one of the webinars that we've had most interest in, not quite Taylor Swift levels of interest, but even so, we had to kind of break it up, and we'll potentially run another session to cover all that we're interested in it, but also to make it available for folk that weren't able to attend. And just to introduce that, I look after a range of policies in the business, industrial energy efficiency space, and ESOS is one of the policies that are based in my branch. So first thing, I guess, because there are so many people, obviously makes it quite a different event to run than a single digit type session. So grateful if you can turn off your mics and cameras to make it as smooth as possible in terms of bandwidth and other things. We're still keen to get your views as we go through the session and to make it interactive, but we'll be taking questions via Slido. So you can go to slido.com and put in the code that is there for the event, hashtag 7471223. If you don't have a Slido account, it should be quick and easy to register during the kind of first half of the session. We've also, in looking at putting the agenda together, considered all the questions that you thankfully submitted ahead of today, because the event is aimed at giving you an overview of the new requirements for phase 3 compliance and an introduction to where we are with the new IT system. We obviously hope you'll find the session useful, and it gives the clarity for participants and assessors alike that we're able to, as well as those involved with the scheme more broadly. And I'm conscious that some of the attendees may, for example, be involved in some of the IT testing that's ongoing at the moment of the system, but we'll say a bit more about that later. And we'll also, in the next week or so, circulate slides and the recording so that it can go wider than just those on our distribution list. So in terms of the agenda, we'll look to cover the kind of legislation and some of the particular questions that have come up have led to some of the sections. So energy intensity ratios, alternative compliance routes such as ISO 50001, action plans and annual progress reports, the public disclosure elements, as well as the introduction to the IT system. We're looking to kind of take a selection of questions to link them to the timings of the presentation. So, for example, on questions around IT, wait until we get onto that rather than asking those questions up front. We also hope to have some time left towards the end of the question if there are any kind of wrap-up questions that you want to pick up. We're conscious some of the questions may be kind of a bit more detailed than we're aiming to cover today, but we will look to kind of prioritise where we can in terms of that further clarity or additional explanations on phase 3. And then just to say that I guess Slido is an opportunity to upvote any questions coming through which are similar to your own that resonate with you. And we'll aim to kind of use that to help focus on the ones that we spend most time on. And then also, if there are specific questions on phase 3 and the guidance, it's also worth reaching out to the Environment Agency through the email address that's there, esos@environmentagency.gov.uk. Move on, please. Next slide. And so I guess in terms of the overview, this is just to give a bit of timeline for those that haven't been involved over the last few years. Certainly recognise not everyone will have been aware of ESOS or involved when it first was introduced in 2014. But I guess in terms of more recent time, we did a significant evaluation of ESOS and used the consultation in July 2021 to act on the findings from that evaluation, where we could improve and strengthen ESOS, given the kind of feedback that we'd had on the first 2 4-year phases. The response to that, after consideration of all the kind of responses we had, was published in July 2022. In turn of that kind of announced where we were making legislative changes to kind of drive that high quality audits through standardized reporting, but also think about how we brought in net zero requirements, given ESOS has primarily been focused on energy efficiency. We know there are potential trade-offs between choices on energy efficiency and decarbonisation, and certainly it's something we're thinking about in the future. And then we also had to wait for new primary legislation to be available, given that ESOS was a mix of originally meeting UK strategic objectives, but also met EU requirements. So it was introduced using the European Communities Act, which post-Brexit was no longer an option. So to make the changes, we had to wait for the Energy Act 23 to complete its passage through this House, so that we could then immediately lay the secondary legislation that brought the new changes in. But also, we recognised meant we needed to move back the kind of compliance deadline, which we did through that legislation as well, to give everyone the opportunity to meet the new standards. I'll now hand over to Ella Livingston, who's going to kind of talk you through in more detail some of those, and happy to come back to questions when we get there. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. So on this slide, I've outlined the key steps of completing an ESOS assessment. You'll see a lot of these steps are similar to phase 2, but there are some differences for phase 3. Here we've just got an overview, and I've included the section numbers for different bits of the guidance. So if you wanted to refer to the phase 3 guidance on the website, the link's there at the bottom of the slide. So throughout all of these assessments, it's really important to keep your evidence pack updated. We'll start on the left-hand part of this slide. We'll start by identifying your total energy consumption. There's more information on that in section 4. We then look at identifying your areas of significant energy consumption, so that's your 95% energy use, that's in section 5. And then calculate your energy intensity ratios. This is new for phase 3, and we'll talk about this in more detail in the later slides. That's in section 6 of the guidance. You'll then look at routes to compliance, which again we'll cover in more detail in later slides. That's in section 7. You then look at auditing your energy consumption and identifying your energy savings opportunities. This is in sections 8 and 9 of the guidance, and we've also got a template in Appendix A3. You can then complete your ESOS report, details on that in section 10, and the checklist in Appendices A1 and A2. You can then submit your notification of compliance to the Environment Agency in section 11 and tabled in Appendix B. And these sections here are new for phase 3, completing an ESOS action plan, which I'll cover in a later slide, and completing annual progress updates, which I'll also cover in a later slide. As we go through all these slides, you'll see at the bottom left-hand corner, there's a grey box, which has the relevant section of the guidance as well. Next slide, please, Marie. Thank you. So we'll first look at energy intensity ratios. This is new for phase 3. And these must be calculated for different areas of your organisational energy use, which we call organisational purposes. These are split into buildings, transport, industrial processes, and then other energy uses, anything that falls outside of those 3 categories. And this measurement is to allow a comparison of energy efficiency performance over time. And the data collected during phase 3 can be used as a baseline for future comparison, which we'll come back to in the later slides. I've also included here a screenshot on the right-hand side of what the energy intensity ratios will look like in the new digital system to add them to the system. And you'll see there are narrative boxes under each of the ratios, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail on the next slide. So to calculate your energy intensity ratio, there's 3 key steps. You have to calculate your total energy consumption and your significant energy consumption where that's applicable. You then identify which areas of total or significant energy consumption relate to buildings, transport, industrial processes, and other energy uses. Those are the organisational purposes we talked about on the previous slide. And then for each organisational purpose, you calculate a ratio using the formula there of energy consumption in kilowatt hours divided by the indicator of activity. And there's going to be different indicators of activity for each organisational area. So the table there gives the guidance on which indicator of activity you should use for each organisational area. But as I mentioned on the previous slide, there are some narrative boxes in the digital system. So if those organisational areas as indicators of activity don't fit, you don't have that data, then you can explain in the narrative what you've used instead and why. So for buildings, the indicator of activity is likely to be the total useful floor area in meters squared for buildings using energy. For transport, we split this into freight and for people. So for freight, you're looking at the miles travelled for each journey multiplied by the mass of freight transported for each journey. And it's the sum of all of that becomes your denominator in the equation. And for people, it's the miles travelled for each journey multiplied by the number of people transported for each journey, and that becomes your denominator. For industrial processes, we're looking at the total industrial output for processes using energy. And for the other areas that don't fit into those three, it's any quantifiable output of the activity. We've put a note at the bottom here that where possible, you should use verifiable data. But if that's not available, you can use an estimation method to estimate the indicator. You must keep a record of this within the evidence pack. That goes back to the first slide that I presented about keeping your evidence pack updated throughout the process, and keep a record of what you've done and why. And more detail is in section 6 of the guidance for energy intensity ratios. Next slide, please. Thank you. So another update for phase 3 is the routes to ESOS compliance. And the routes to carrying out an ESOS assessment are either through energy audits, through certified ISO 50001 energy management system that covers either all or part of your organisation, display energy certificates with their accompanying advisory reports, and Green Deal assessments. So at least 95% of your total energy consumption must be covered by one or more of these routes above to be fully compliant with ESOS. And you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a screenshot there of what that will look like in the new digital system to notify the Environment Agency of which routes you've used. I'll talk through these in a little bit more detail on the next slide. Thanks, Marie. So on this slide, the blue boxes show those different options. We've got the ISO 50001 energy management system, which can cover all of the organisation or part of the organisation, slightly different routes depending on which option of those you go for. And we've got the energy audits, display energy certificates, and Green Deal assessments. So if you have ISO 50001 covering all of your organisation, you don't require a lead assessor to comply with ESOS. You do need to complete an ESOS report, but it has fewer requirements than the other routes. And this is detailed in section 10.1 and appendix A1 of the guidance. It explains what you need to do in that ESOS report. If you have ISO 50001 that only covers part of the organisation, or you've used energy audits, display energy certificates, or Green Deal assessments, the proportion of the total energy consumption covered by all those needs to be determined. If as a combination of one or more of those, they cover at least 95% of your total energy consumption, then no further compliance routes are needed. If they cover less than 95%, then you need to look at additional routes to take to get to that 95%. So it might be an additional energy audit, for example. And for these options, a lead assessor does need to review your compliance, and you'll need to complete a full ESOS report, which is outlined in section 10.2 and appendix A2 of the guidance. And whichever route that you take, so whether you have that ISO 50001 covering all of your organisation, or you're using a combination of part ISO 50001 audits, DEX and GDA, you need to notify the Environment Agency of compliance, and you need to keep an evidence pack as well. And the certifications or the assessments that you've used for that compliance must have been issued after the 5th of December 2019 and be valid either until the 5th of December 2023 or the 5th of June 2024, which is the extended compliance date. And more information on those routes can be found in section 7 of the guidance. So this slide outlines 2 key updates for phase 3, which is action plans and annual progress updates. So for action plans, participants are required to set an action plan for their future energy saving measures. And this has to include what participants intend to do to reduce their energy consumption and when they intend to do it, whether this was a recommendation from an ESOS assessment, and the projected savings and how these were estimated. These action plans must be submitted by the 5th of December 2024 to cover the period from 6th of December 2023 to the 5th of December 2027. The annual progress updates, these come after the action plans, and they include which energy saving actions participants have completed since the action plan and the estimated savings from those completed actions. The deadline for these, the first is the 5th of December 2025, and the second is 5th of December 2026. I've included a timeline at the bottom there, so you can see the period covered by the action plan is from the 6th of December 2023, which is when the action plan period started, through to the 5th of December 2027. And then we have the 2 progress updates and the reporting period for those. The first one from December 2024 to December 2025, and the second from December 2025 to December 2026. So action plans and progress reports must be submitted even if no action is going to be taken. If they're not submitted, then the Environment Agency will publish that you don't intend to carry out any energy saving action. Also new for phase 3 is the public disclosure of compliance information. Previously, the Environment Agency had published a list of which undertakings complied with ESOS. It's a list of which organisations had complied. In addition to that, the Environment Agency for phase 3 will publish more information received from participants, including energy consumption data, including energy intensity ratios, estimates of energy savings achieved, action plans and progress updates, as I talked about on the previous slide. All the details and the information that will be published is set out in Appendix B on the online guidance. There's a link there, and I've just included a screenshot on the right-hand side to show what the digital system will look like in terms of adding that information to the notification of compliance. Now, I'll give you a quick oversight onto the new ESOS digital service before I hand over to my digital colleagues to talk in a bit more detail. So the new online notification system will replace the smart survey system that was used for ESOS phase 2. And this new system is going to provide a much more secure, modern and user-friendly service. It's much more accessible. It's currently undergoing testing, including sessions with volunteers to provide user feedback. An important change from this is that responsible undertakings reporting ESOS compliance will need to create a user account. They can then add an external lead assessor to complete that notification of compliance, and it will be the responsible undertaking, not the lead assessor, who's just responsible for submitting this information. The system is currently undergoing private beta testing, looking at undergoing digital service assessment in February. That's a government requirement, and then the system will go live as soon as possible. And I've included some information on what's required to be submitted in Appendix B of the online guidance, which you can look at as well. And with that, I'll hand over to my digital colleagues to talk in a little bit more detail about the digital system.
Thank you, Ella. I'm just going to check you guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. My name is Matt Murphy. I'm the product manager for the new ESOS digital service. I'm just going to be walking you through a couple of slides just to give you a bit of an overview of how the service is going to work, and also just a few other slides that are going to describe some information that you can provide and prepare in advance of the service going live, to help that process go more smoothly once the service is available online. If you could click to the next slide, please. So there's a number of key benefits of this service, and Ella mentioned a few in the previous slide, but unlike the smart survey solution, the new digital service is based on what we call a gov.uk standard or a GDS standard. This means that to use the service, all users will have a user account. This will remember data that they enter. And so essentially you can go through the various different items of information that you need to enter for the compliance with ESOS, and come back to your account and enter data at different visits to the service. So you don't have to enter all of the information in one go. It will remember that data in the database, and you can come back and you can edit that data actually as well, all the way up to the point where you click to submit that information. Also briefly mentioned earlier were these routes to compliance. So different organisations are going to have different service journeys depending on whether they're ISO 50001 or use different methodologies to comply with ESOS. And depending on some of the early questions within the service, it will direct you through specific routes in the system that only display questions or ask you to enter information that's relevant to your organisation, depending on how you're going to comply with that service. And that will make that journey more efficient. With regard to some of the more complex data that needs to be uploaded, specifically around group undertakings, where you may need to enter a large amount of information for different subsidiary organisations or related organisations as part of your submission, the new service allows you to bulk upload these via a CSV file, which is like an Excel spreadsheet file. That also can be prepared offline in advance, and we'll be sharing that template with you before the service goes live. We're hoping that not only makes that the way of uploading the information more simplified, but importantly, it enables us to store all of this data in a database that's much easier to search and report against in the future. And finally, around the accessibility, design and security of the service, being a gov.uk service, it complies with the standard industry standards for accessibility and usability, and importantly, security. And you would recognise the gov.uk designs when we do the demo shortly. This service aligns with all other gov.uk services. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is just a very quick overview of the service. The ESOS digital services is actually quite simple. Just starting in the top left, similar to other services you may have seen, you'll browse through to the gov.uk page for ESOS. You'll probably be able to search via Google search just for the ESOS service, and it will take you through to your user registration page. As part of this, as I explained earlier on, you need to register as a user onto the service. You'll need to enter an email address. Once you've got an account within the system and you've got two-factor authentication set up, which is essentially where you create a unique key via a mobile phone app to make sure that the connection is secure, you'll create an organisation account, which is for the responsible undertaking, and you can add users to that account. So, for example, you could add lead assessors to that account as well. And lead assessors can enter the submission, the notification of compliance information on your behalf. We'll be demonstrating some of these later, so just wanted to walk you through the service overview. Once you've got the account set up, you complete what's called the notification of compliance, and that will take you through probably a number of fairly familiar questions that you would have undertaken in phase 2, and some new areas of the service as well. And it's important to note that some of these key areas of information can be prepared in advance of go live offline, to enable you to get ready in advance of the service going live. And ultimately, you through the service, you click to submit your notification to the regulators at the end of that process. Next slide, please. I'm just going to walk you through some very quickly some of this preparation you can do before the service goes live. So one of the key things I mentioned there was around the user account and organisation accounts that you need to have. What we would like to do is to preload some of this information where possible into the service, and to do that, we will need where we don't have the data already from phase 2. We'd like to be able to confirm the users and their email addresses against the organisations that they'll be submitting for in advance. We'll be sharing an online form over the next couple of weeks to enable you to do this in advance. The key benefit of this really is that the verification of email addresses against companies can be done offline and more quickly, so that, as I'm sure you can imagine, once a large amount of users want to access the service, as far as possible, we can have that information in the system already. Essentially, what that means is that you will get an email from the service that invites you to go and set up your password and your two-factor authentication, and then claim your organisational account that you've pre-advised us of. We'll contact you very soon about this. And early engagement with your lead assessor, if you have one, is important for this process, because, as you would have seen, the responsible undertaking has to create the account, and then the lead assessors are invited to that account as well. Next slide, please. The other more complicated area that I mentioned earlier was this group undertaking. Essentially, what I've tried to show you here is a snapshot of what the CSV file will probably look like at the bottom of the screen there. This will be downloadable from the service, from within the service, but we'll also make this available offline in advance, so you can see the information that's required for all the subsidiary or related organisations as part of the submission. This can be completed in advance, and then uploaded at that point during the service to help speed up that process. Next slide, please. And finally, just around this data readiness, the energy data. So Ella mentioned this earlier on as well in her part of the presentation. There's a number of screens within the service to enter that data for ESOS, for the different different components of the policy. On screen, there's just one of these. There's several screens, such as this one. We'll make available within the guidance clear description of how that data needs to be entered, so that you can be prepared in advance with structuring your data in a way that is quick and simple to enter for the multiple organisations or single organisations you may need to be entering this data for. Next slide, please. Just finally, this is just kind of a summary slide. On the right-hand side there, you can see one of the first screens within the service. We break down the various different components of the notification into sections. Each of those sections can be revisited or visited on separate visits to the service. It will mark as completed or not started, so you can see what the status is of your compliance journey. We appreciate that this journey can take some time, depending on where the data is available, whether it's available at that point in time, or you may want to come back and edit. The service allows you to do that. And on the left-hand side is just a couple of examples, just to identify that there'll be some examples or actual templates that you will use to upload that information. And this will be coming in the next few weeks as we start to finalise how those items of the service are going to be delivered. And I think that's my last one. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, so that concludes my overview. We're now going to give you a very quick demonstration of the service. It's now in private beta, so we're going to be able to demonstrate the private beta version of the service to you, and my colleague Anil Licky is going to show you this now. So thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I'm Anil, test lead working on this project. So I'm going to demonstrate a few of the journeys that Matt has shown in the PPT. So let me share my screen and then take you over. I hope you can see my screen. So I'm going to demonstrate 4 items today. One is user sign up, and the next is how users can apply for an organization account, and subsequently how they could set up additional users. And once that is done, how we could trigger knock and follow the different section.
And Neil, I'm not sure we can all see the screen. For me, it's just a white screen.
1 second. Can you see now?
We can see it now. Yeah.
Okay, sorry for the glitch. Right, so this is our ESOS application, and this is our landing page. So I'll quickly show how users can sign up. So you have a link, just follow that, and you just need a valid email ID. So organization users, you might need a valid email ID, and then you just input it. So you're registering it, and this should send you a activation email, and you should receive an activation email. Yeah, as you can see, you received an activation email, and you have a link to it. So and then you just try to you get an activation email. You have a link. I have already registered, so that's why I'm not seeing it. So let me try to register it into the service, and second. One second, I think my email ID is blocked. Sorry for this glitch. One second, I'll just stop sharing my screen. I'll just get a new. Very sorry for this glitch.
Just while Anil's sorting that, I think it's worth just explaining a little bit about how this first part of the process works. Once you either I mentioned earlier on, you can pre-register with your information, but you can also go straight to the service without doing that. And as Anna was going to demonstrate, you'll enter your email address, it sends an email confirmation, and then you go through to set up your password afterwards. But yeah, it's a kind of 2 or 3 step process before you get the password approved, and at that point you would then log in to set up your 2-factor authentication.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, I'm going to share my screen now. Yeah, sorry. Okay, let me create a sign in. Continue. Then yeah, you should receive an activation email. Yeah, I've got an email to confirm. So you will have a little link to confirm your email ID. So click that, which should take you to page to confirm your email address and then input your details. Valid phone number. As you can see, your email is populated because you used that for your registration, and fill all the mandatory details. You choose your password. Okay. Check all your details are correct. If not, you can just click the change link and change the details and submit. So your account is created. So as you are creating, you will get some notification emails. So I'm not going into the notification emails for now, but let me try to sign in. And once your user account is signed up, you need to set up your 2-factor authentication. So we provided some links and videos on how to do your setup or 2FA setup and how to download apps. So I've already downloaded the app, so I'm just using to sign this up. Yeah, this generates a 6-digit token. Yeah, you just need to click the terms and conditions. And that finishes our user setup. So the first part is done. And now the users have to apply for an organization account. As Matt was alluding to, either you could create an organization account, and we are trying to get some preloaded account, and then later you can claim it. So let me go with applying for organization account. So fill all the details as suggested. And let me use a test organization. So I'm just filling some test details here. Choose your location, and that's it. All your details are here. Again, if you want to change any of these before submitting it, you can change it and update it and then submit. So once this is submitted, as an organization user, you have applied for an account, and that needs to be confirmed by the system administrator. So your application has to be approved before you add other users and perform your NOC workflow. So let me flip to another browser where I logged in as a system admin. So let me just approve this account so that I could take you to the next steps. This is an admin part, so regulator users don't need to do anything here. It's more of an admin task for us. Right, your application is approved. Now let me go back to the screen where I logged in as operator or organization user. Let me refresh my screen. And so as you can see, my the account that I've created is now listed in my accounts tab. So once your account is approved, you just need to go to the account section and just go through that account. So if you have more accounts, it will all be listed here. So I'm choosing this. So once you click it, this opens up the world of that organization where you could see the details and you could see users and contacts. So this is where you do all your user management activities, where you could add additional users. So you could onboard additional organization users, or you could onboard your lead assessor. So anyone that you want to add, all you have to do is simply you have a drop down here, select the user type and just click continue, and it will ask you to input the details, which will send an invitation email to other users. So I'm not going to demonstrate the whole process, but once you get the invitation email, as I have shown you, you get an email just like you have seen here, the link to it, and then that's how you get the activation email, and then you could just fill up the details, create your password 2FA, and you're into the system. So this is how we add users. So now quickly going into the knock part. So this completes our part 3, and now we are going to the step 4, which is creating knock. So let me rewind. So once your organization is approved, you just need to go to accounts, open your organization, and you see a little link here which says start a new task. So this is where you can trigger your knock, and let me click start to trigger it. Once I trigger, my task should come up in your dashboard. So let me take through this process. So submit. You will see the section. So first you need to just fill the first section so that other sections will come up. So let me just take through one step. So it will ask you whether you qualify or not. So say yes, and then the reasons for your qualification, you could select both R1 as per the organization, and then the other responsible notifications and stuff. So click, and I'm just going to pre-fill the first section. So it's 100%. So let me see. Okay, check your details and confirm and continue. So once your first section is complete, then the application opens up to other sections where you need to provide all the details regarding the knock. And once all the sections are complete, then you could submit to regulator. So currently this is Ash stuff, so you cannot submit because it will prevent the application submitting it. But once all the sections are completed, then you should be able to submit your knock. So various routes, as Ella and Matt have said. So going through each section will give you a logical web pages where you will go through and then start putting your details. And then, yeah, once all the sections are complete, then you could submit it to the regulator. So this completes a very high level demo on how this system is going to work. And the system is under testing, and we are making modifications as we see. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Anil. Yeah, that's it from us, actually. Thanks very much, everyone. If there's any questions at the appropriate time, we're happy to answer. Thank you.
Thanks, Old. I think now we will go into the Q&A session and kind of focus on those that have come through Slido. I think, as I said at the start, we unfortunately, given we have several hundred attendees on this call, don't think it would have worked to do kind of individual hands up questions for all 500. So I think we're going to focus on what are the key ones. I think certainly just in terms of the question about the slides, we'll certainly look to make them available as soon as we can. And likewise, as mentioned, the recording to kind of allow both those are on the call to kind of have a record of what's been discussed, but also those that wanted to see it, that want to see it also. Marie, did you want to kind of flag what are the kind of key questions that we ought to focus on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had Dina and Fiona keeping track of all of those coming in on Slido. So thank you everyone for participating and upvoting those that you felt resonated with you most. Dina, shall I invite you on first? Do you want to pick some of the most popular questions?
Yeah, thank you. So we'll do it in the order of most popular. After the question about the slides, the next one is the full ESOS manual with new requirements was issued in November. Could the deadline be extended to December 2024?
Thanks for that question, and I guess it builds on some of the questions we've had already up before the webinar. I think our view is that given the kind of warning that we've given, including newsletters from the Environment Agency and the government response was in 2022, I think that our view is there's been sufficient time for organisations to understand, even if we recognise the kind of the final guidance had to wait for the legislation to complete its passage. But I think we would say that we've given enough by way of warning, and actually a lot of the things that organisations have had to do were common to what organisations should have been doing to build the evidence pack. Yes, we recognise that, you know, more by way of moving up to 95% of significant energy consumption and the EIRs, but we think that, and our current understanding that the portal, subject to the final testing, shouldn't be that far away. We think there is sufficient time for organisations to kind of still meet the deadline that's in legislation of June. Obviously, we'll you know, continue to watch this space. You know, if there were to be, example, significant delay to the portal because of something that came out in testing, but our view is that we should stay with the kind of June deadline as it is, and likewise also with the December deadline for the action plans that we've set out.
Thanks, Gary. Moving on to the next question. Why can't we use the same intensity ratio we report for SECR? Why the additional requirements for intensity ratios that aren't necessary in our ENMS?
So that's certainly, Ella, did you want to come in?
I'm happy to come in on that one. Yes, certainly something that we thought about when we were developing the changes for phase 3. SCCR focuses much more on the emissions side of things rather than energy use, so the ratios measure slightly different outcomes. And also in ESOS, we have that distinction between buildings, transport and industrial processes, which we don't have in SCCR. Gary, is there anything else you wanted to add to that one?
Other than we're certainly looking, as we're developing the portal, to think about opportunities for common information to be used in SECR reports and in ESOS reports where they apply, and certainly things like, for example, company numbers. You know, if both link to company's house, then we're looking at ways to read across, as well as, you know, you can, for example, use some of the information that you've done for your energy efficiency actions that you've taken for your SEC report can also feed into your action plans and progress reports for ESOS. So we're certainly looking at where the boundaries for different schemes that, as Ella says, may not all be focused on common units, given one maybe about energy efficiency, one more about emissions, but certainly looking at that, as well as, for example, linkages to schemes such as climate change agreements or the UK energy trading scheme, because we're also conscious that there will be, you know, a fair amount of organisations in scope of a number of the different policies and programmes. So we're certainly looking at ways to kind of reduce the overall administrative cost to businesses, and also how we can work with delivery bodies to facilitate that as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Gary. Moving on to the next one. If you do not have energy intensity data available for energy consumption period, for example, tonne per mile data for transport, what estimation method is suggested?
So it's probably, I don't know if people have looked at the guidance, and certainly section 6 goes into a fair amount in terms of the different approaches that you can take in terms of energy intensity ratios and how they relate to total energy or significant energy consumption, as well as the kind of metrics for buildings, energy, transport, so or kind of where there's others, because we recognise that some things may not fall neatly in, you know, an industry or a building's whole. So there is scope to kind of add a different metric, and certainly to set out where those estimates are based on verifiable data rather than estimates. There will be requirements, and it's probably difficult to go into all the different scenarios and say this is the precise way. I think certainly the legislation is what you should look at in the first instance, and certainly, you know, how it ties into kind of reasonable approaches that someone might take in terms of how they've estimate, including things like, you know, where you're an organisation with lots of different sites, how you've chosen the different sampling approaches is certainly something that should be part of the evidence pack that you provide.
Thank you. There are a couple of other really detailed questions. I suggest we deal with these offline. I'm going to move on to the broader ones. The next most popular question, is there going to be dedicated support for ESOS lead assessors in especially considering the holes and ambiguity in the guidance? No response from ESOS email.
So others may want to come in, including, I know, Environment Agency colleagues are on the call as well to take a view. But I think, I guess we recognise there's a balance in terms of how long a guidance document do you want. We're conscious that it's already 130 pages, and recognising that ESOS covers, you know, quite a heterogeneity of businesses. We aren't able to cover all things, and certainly have put in you know, worked examples to help give a bit more real life element to the guidance. But we're happy to kind of work with the professional bodies to kind of pick up on that and see what further we might need to do by way of support for lead assessors to kind of cover any gaps or kind of questions that might come up, both from lead assessors but also from participants. I don't know if Environment Agent colleagues wanted to add anything.
Yes, I think hopefully you can see me. It's Mike Denby. I would take the government liaison lead in the Environment Agency for ESOS. And so just to sort of further Gary's comments, we would be looking at undertaking additional workshops with the professional bodies just to capture and help support the information that they're going to need to require in order to continue with their work of supporting the lead assessors that are registered. We do aim to respond to all questions that are raised through the help desk email. I think that's going to be posted at the end again. So as Gary said, we can't put every specific detail out. I know the guidance has got a range of sort of suggestions, and the IT is being designed so that it allows for a narrative to be added to help support those which are slightly less obvious, perhaps, in terms of energy intensity ratio. So yeah, appreciate this first year of reporting these new elements. So that's something else that we've got to take into consideration when the time comes to review the NOC information that is provided. So yeah, hopefully that gives some reassurance, but it is new, so there's going to be a few teething problems that we're going to have to work through. But I think that's all I need to add here. Thanks, Gary.
On kind of questions, I don't know, Dina, if there are any other ones that particularly you want to focus on. I recognise the question about the kind of role of lead assessors in the IT portal, including where they're submitting information on behalf of a number of clients. I don't know, Elle, if you want to kind of build on your point earlier about it is I guess the undertaking that is responsible for compliance. So they are the ones that need to kind of be first on the system in that process. But over to you, Ella.
Thanks, Gary. I mean, yes, just to reiterate that point from earlier, and actually it might be helpful for digital colleagues to explain a bit more about how that might work in the system. But Matt, I don't know if I can invite you back on to talk through how that might work in the system.
Hi, sorry, can you just repeat the question, Ella?
So it's around that distinction between the responsible undertakings and the lead assessors and the system, and how the information will be uploaded.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what I discussed earlier on around the pre-uploading of information, that is just for the responsible undertakings. So it will be the representative or contact from the company that are responsible for the ESOS assessment. That information can be preloaded. This is our current thinking, at least, and they would then the bit that the demo that Anil gave, you saw quite a lot about how you register for an account. That bit will be automated by providing the information in advance, and the account will be created on your behalf. But it's only at the point where the account's created that you can then invite a lead assessor, and we call them restricted users, because essentially there's certain things that they can't do, like they can't submit to the regulator like the responsible undertaking can. That they would need to be added through that process. It will be interesting to get feedback on how that could be improved as an onboarding process. But the way that it is envisaged at the moment is that it would be a preloading of responsible undertaking data only, because that's the way that the policy is intended, is that it's the responsibility of the organisations to create their own accounts. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're gone, Gary.
No, I think that's right, and certainly we also build on some of the kind of evaluation findings that we'd had, where there was a worry that some responsible undertakings weren't actually being as close to the report that might have been submitted. And given the legislation is clear that it's something that the responsible undertaking should be signing off, then that's why we've taken that approach. We're also thinking through the kind of the questions around access to previous data. I think we recognise it's not on the same system, but there is all currently available. A lot of the phase 2 data has been published by the Environment Agency, so organisations should be able to find that. But we're looking at what might be possible in that front. But it won't be preloaded into the kind of the new system is where we are at the moment.
I'm not sure if this was covered in the previous response, but I'll just ask it again now, just in case, as it's the most upvoted. Will lead assessors be able to upload compliance data on behalf of the client?
I can answer that one if you like. Yes, absolutely. So just as I said before, the account needs to be initiated or created by the organisation. They can add a lead assessor as a user onto their account, and then that lead assessor can enter all of the notification of compliance data on behalf of the organisation. The final step actually is that the responsible undertaking contact needs to approve and submit that to the regulator. But right up to the point of approval or submission, which was the kind of green box on my slide earlier, that can all be completed by the by the lead assessor. Hopefully that helps.
Thanks. And whilst we're on that, will previous ESOS phase data be available within accounts?
I think my understanding is not currently, because of the difference between the systems. and partly because we're conscious that organisations may well have changed significantly in terms of who submitted previous information in 2015 or 2019. But we, as I said, there is currently still available access to the data from previous submissions that the Environment Agency have published and is available in a public domain. But a lot of it wasn't submitted to the Environment Agency in the same way it was kept in the evidence pack that organisations had. Whereas now this approach to ESOS is requiring in phase 3 more of the information to be provided through the portal than was previously the case. So it may be that a lot of the information should be available within the organisation rather than having been submitted previously to the Environment Agency.
Thanks, Gary. Next question. Who are the reports being produced for? A lot of the information now required in the report is not actually required by the client.
Some of that information is required by the Environment Agency to ensure compliance, thorough compliance with ESOS, and some of that will be required for comparing across different phases of ESOS, so comparing back in the future from action plans and progress reports as well. Gary, is there anything to add on that one?
So some of the information is about providing, information to businesses to enable them to make informed decisions on actions that they can take to reduce their energy and potentially in future their carbon emissions, given the work we're, for example, doing on a publicly available specification PAS standard that allows kind of decarbonisation to come in energy audits in future phases. And then there's that balance also in terms of some of the asks of the information from wider stakeholders or to inform policy or all kind of other uses that the information has, including for us to think about where we are against net zero and energy reduction commitments.
Thank you. Moving on to the next question, just trying to make sure we don't go over ones we've already asked. How will intensity ratios be considered if an industrial organisation has many different processes?
You can produce multiple intensity ratios, so you might need to look at producing different intensity ratio, one for each industrial process.
Thanks, Ella. And where will the action plan and progress reports be published?
So we're kind of working through that, partly because I guess the action plan is something that's December, and I think our focus has primarily been about ensuring everything is ready for June, but we'll certainly want to share as soon as we can, because there have also been separate questions about templates to help on developing action plans, although there are elements in the guidance that kind of set out that as well as parts of the legislation. In terms of the guidance, the action plans, the legislation says what bits will be required to be published and which are submitted to the regulator or the Environment Agency. I don't know, Elle, if you wanted to add anything.
Just on that as well, is there a standard template to follow on the ESOS action plans?
There isn't currently, and this is something that we're looking at developing, so it may well be something that we produce ahead of the action plan deadline in December. But currently we don't have a template, and there's that flexibility there to produce something that's useful for the organisation.
Thanks. The next question, is ESOS phase 4 going to be aligned to the changes made to the EU Energy Efficiency Directive?
I think not necessarily would be the kind of, I guess, the general, post-Brexit, we don't have to follow EU directives, so it isn't necessarily something that will necessarily mean that we have to replicate the approach under the Energy Efficiency Directive to kind of future phases. And also, as I set out, we've already flagged some elements of direction of travel in terms of bringing decarbonisation into it. So that may be seen to digress from where the EU energy efficiency obligations are going.
Moving on to a digital question now. Can one unique digital service user be associated with multiple organisation accounts? For example, consultants responding for several clients.
I think that's a question for me. No. So a lead assessor needs to be added to each organisation account that they represent individually. We have had a lot of feedback on this actually through our research and private beta, but the way the system's designed at the moment is that it's led by the organisation account or the responsible undertaking account, who can then add lead assessors to that account, as opposed to as a lead assessor having their own account that can have multiple organisations. That aligns with the way that the policy is designed as well, in that the organisations lead the process and invite lead assessors to that.
Thanks, Matt. There's another question here around why this type of information and support is being provided so close to the deadline, and whether in the future this could be provided a little bit more in advance.
I think certainly we would have liked to kind of get through the, for example, legislation earlier, but as I mentioned earlier, we had to wait for the passage of the Energy Act to allow us to put the final legislation in place, and we're unable to do that. We did, as I mentioned earlier, the kind of the 6-month delay to the compliance deadline was part of a response to that delay in the information, the final policy getting through Parliament, coupled with the fact that we didn't wait until the legislation was through to start sharing information through, the government response, the ESOS newsletter, and other vehicles. But yeah, ideally, we would be in a position where we would get lots of things out earlier, but also recognise, the priorities of the government on Ukraine, energy affordability, and other elements meant that there were parliamentary time would at a premium. So we unfortunately had to wait to get the final legislation in place. But we're keen to share as much as we can as early as we can through that process, because it's easier for us as well as it is for the Environment Agency and the assessors and the participants.
Thanks, Gary. Moving on to the next question, could this not be combined with SECR? Again, creating different intensity ratios from the same data at different intervals.
So, really good question, and certainly, as I mentioned, something that we're thinking about in terms of, are there different ways to kind of streamline different asks, or at least align a requirement. So, if you are putting information on your ESOS response, can you feed it across? There are kind of different business populations in scope of ESOS and SECR, and different timelines that may make that tricky, but we're certainly looking at what is the art of the possible in that space. And as Ella mentioned earlier, the kind of that there's also an element of SECR is an annual basis, whereas ESOS audits have only been every 4 years, even if action plans and progress reports kind of bring a bit of a more annual flavour to that. But we're certainly keen to look at what is possible and what through common IT systems is doable.
Thanks, Gary. And when will the portal be published?
So I think we're keen to kind of get it available as soon as possible. But as Matt and Anil said, we're still kind of want to ensure that we're through the final testing and learn from some of that user research in beta before we kind of get it go live. I think we're hoping it's sometime soon, but we want to ensure that it's ready to go live before we set the final date. But certainly all the people on this call will know as soon as we have the kind of go live date.
Thanks, Gary. The next top question is quantifying energy savings already made since ESOS 2 has been difficult. Does this data have to be uploaded for the NOC and NOC, and will the NOC be rejected without it?
We'll come back in terms of, I think as long you will need to meet whatever is the minimum requirement that is set in the legislation, and that includes some elements of assessment of savings. But we also recognise there are some voluntary elements in there in terms of phase 1 and phase 2. So if you do not provide information against anything that is marked as voluntary, the NOC would not be rejected. It's where you don't provide mandatory information is where the NOC would be rejected. There will be some things that will be rejected through the IT system. For example, if your SEC doesn't add up to at least 95%, but Mike may want to come in because in some ways that kind of links to an enforcement position rather than a policy position.
Yes, that's all right. Thank you, Gary. So I thought it was just worth adding, if you've completed the NOC for phase 3 and you've excluded data perhaps for previous phases, which, as Gary said, is actually a voluntary requirement, then the current setup in terms of the IT is that the NOC will not be rejected. It would be accepted as long as, and if you saw the slide earlier, all the different elements of the phase 3 compliance have been completed, and therefore you can submit. So yeah, we obviously won't be taking any action in terms of anybody that's submitted a NOC for phase 3 but perhaps hasn't completed the voluntary elements. That's something obviously I know we're pushing and we'd like people to complete, but from an Environment Agency point of view, as we understand the IT, it will be accepted. We wouldn't be taking any action if you hadn't included previous phase information that you happen to have at your disposal. Oh, thank you.
Thanks. So the next question, do action plans also need signing off by a lead assessor?
No, they don't, or they may want to involve the lead assessor to get the most out of your action plan, and they don't have to be signed off by a lead assessor. So that's a short answer, but hopefully gets to the point.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Thank you. I think we might actually turn off questions within the next few minutes, just because we have quite a few coming through on Slido and we want to make sure that we can answer all of them. So this is your last chance to submit a question before we close it and get on with the ones we've got already queued. So moving on, there are questions around whether they can have a list of all questions that will need to be answered on the submission portal in advance.
Certainly, we'll look to provide kind of what we can by way of, as Matt said, some of the kind of early things that will be helpful to be ready to kind of both register on the system and provide the information. They build on some of the templates and kind of sections that were provided in the newsletters previously, but we'll certainly look at what we can provide additionally through either the Environment Agency newsletter or through gov.uk.
Just to add to that, there is information in the guidance about what's required for compliance, so it's in one of the appendices as well.
Thank you. As an investment manager, do only investments in which we have majority shares are included in our group of companies?
We may come back to that one. We'll just check that we're giving the right information in terms of certainly I guess there is guidance on joint ventures and other things in terms and the kind of the responsible organisations and eligibility criteria. So we may come back separately to that rather than we just want to check through the answer on that one.
I'll just add to that, it may be one if you want to submit that to us as well directly, because as Gary said, there's probably other elements around that particular question that we need to understand further before we'd be able to give you the answer, the right answer. So
thank you. Moving on to the next one. One question talks about them having over 300 site audits completed, which they'll need to backtrack on. Can this be done after the notification deadline, assuming notification is compliant?
This one may be one for Mike, and it may be something that we'll kind of finalise in terms of the IT system, in terms of, because in theory, once you've submitted what you consider to be a compliant notification, that is the one the Environment Agency or other enforcement bodies would be looking at, rather than having multiple opportunities to change it. But Mike, I don't know if you want to say from an EA perspective. On mute, Mike.
Muted, yeah. I didn't quite catch the end of the question, but I think I got the gist. So the way the IT system is set up, as I understand it, is once you've submitted, once you've done the final submission and it locks the knock in situ, we're hoping then if you think that there are elements within that that need to be updated and changed prior to the deadline, then you could get in touch with us and we can discuss and perhaps unlock the knock so that you can make those changes. Post deadline, then of course we would need to discuss what it is you're looking to change and the reasons behind that. So it would have to stay locked until we fully understood what was needed to be changed, and if that had any impact on any well, potentially enforcement, where we're not looking at to jump straight onto that, but that's why it would have to be fully discussed first before we could allow any changes post deadline. So hopefully that answers your question, but I didn't quite get the whole of that question.
No, thanks, Mike. It certainly helps, and I guess just kind of for when I guess we say knock, that's the kind of formal notification of compliance. Is a shorthand that's already started to come into to play. And I guess the other thing, certainly we recognise, as a number have asked about, flagged about timings here, and ideally there would have been more warning. But I think we're trying through this webinar that builds on previous things, including the guidance that was published a couple of months ago, that does provide sufficient information.
Thanks, Carrie. The next question, will the EA be auditing us against legislation requirements or the EA guidance?
I think that's probably for kind of Mike to kind of flag. My expectation is that the legal requirement is what is important here, rather than necessarily the guidance.
So again, I must have not a great connection here, but can you repeat the question again, just so I make, because it sounds like this is an important one to make sure I've got it clear.
So the kind of what is most important for the Environment Agency, is it the legislation or is it the guidance in terms of your enforcement position?
Oh, okay. So legislation, without a doubt. We can't take any enforcement based on guidance specifically. It always has to link back to the legislation, because that's where we would actually be making reference. People may be aware we have the enforcement sanctions policy, which we set out all the different breaches that we would take action against. So it's sort of there is a combination of what and how we take enforcement as well. So it's not just based on legislation, but ultimately we wouldn't be able to take enforcement if it wasn't linked back to legislation. Excuse me. Yeah, so that's the answer.
Thank you. The next question looks at our awareness of, or our understanding of, some of the extra costs that these new changes might have caused to stakeholders so late into this phase, and how we plan to address that.
So I think we recognise that the changes that we set out and had been given forewarning of in the 2021 consultation and the 22 government response would potentially increase the cost of audits. But we also were driven by the evaluation that there was a need for better quality audits and disclosures to happen to kind of improve the benefits from the scheme. So we think that the kind of additional costs are justified to get to make the scheme improved in the way that the evaluation and responses to the consultation had asked us to do so. As I said, we recognise that the legislation being delayed and the IT system would have impacts. That was why we gave an additional 6 months to allow businesses to all meet the same standard, rather than have an a la carte approach to the kind of meeting the kind of requirements where they differed from previous phases. So I think we're keen to improve the scheme, and that's why we've made the changes, even if we recognise timing is not ideal here, but we think that the kind of June extension gives time for everyone to meet those requirements.
Thanks, Gary. Moving on to the next question. Should the intensity metrics be for the TEC or SEC?
This depends on whether you're reporting on your total energy consumption or your significant energy consumption. So if you're reporting on your significant energy consumption, then that's what your energy intensity ratio should be based on. But if you're reporting 100% of your energy use to your total energy consumption, then you calculate your energy intensity ratios based on your total energy consumption.
And the only other thing to add on that is obviously there's kind of metrics that link to how that splits down to buildings, industrial processes, transport or other. So there's a kind of read across between the kind of total as well as the kind of the purposes.
Thanks. Has it been decided how the company will upload its company structure? Will it be Excel sheet, diagram, list or other?
I don't know if Matt may want to come in on that, because I know there are kind of different approaches to uploads that may be available.
So was it organisation structure you said? Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So organisation structure, it's by a list in a CSV file. So that's like an Excel file, or similar to an Excel file. The template, I presented it earlier on, the kind of basic template that we're looking at, and we'll share that in shortly, actually, once we've got that confirmed. The previous service, just to highlight, accepted lots of different formats, including PowerPoints or JPEGs. The problem with that way of inputting that kind of complex data is that you can't store it in a database very easily. So we're insisting that it's now entered through a structured template, which means that we can store that data more easily. and that can be shared in advance of the service going live as well, so that it will help with any perceived shortage of time to input that data later on. So we'll be sharing that soon.
Thanks. I'm now going to hand over to Marie to pick up the second half of the questions.
Thanks, Dina. So on to the next question, which is, does all coverage of ISO 5001 mean more than 95% or all the organisation?
So I assume this is in relation to routes for compliance with ESOS, so whether your ISO 50001 covers all your organisation or partial coverage, and for all coverage it would mean 100% of your organisation covered by that.
Thanks, Ella. I'll move on to the next one. Will there be more detailed guidance on how to do estimates for the intensity metric where data is not available to calculate the intensity metric?
I think Gary covered this earlier when we were talking about there are some examples in the guidance on and some worked examples as well to help with that. There's also the opportunity in the digital system to explain what approach has been used and why, but we can look at some more detailed information on that as well.
Thanks, Ella. So we've been asked to consider this point, which says this above and below 3-year payback is very dependent in energy prices paid per kilowatt hour. Since late 2022, this varies widely. We've been asked for our views.
So I think where assessors have used evidence to justify payback periods, they should, in the evidence back, include where those estimates have come from, because as the kind of questioner rightly points out, there are kind of a range of different estimates over different timeframes for different fuel sources. I think as we set out in the guidance, where you have real verified data, then that should be kind of set out clearly. And where you've used estimates, again, you should set out clearly where those estimates have come from. But we certainly take the point in terms of 3-year payback can vary differently. And I think the other thing is you should also be clear in terms of where it is simple payback versus full lifetime payback as well.
Thank you. So the next question is somebody querying whether DEX has been removed as a compliance route.
Thanks, Marie. So no, DEX is still a compliance route for phase 3. It'll be for phase 4 where we're looking to remove it as an option, and that was outlined in the government response to the consultation.
Thanks, Ella. The next participant is asking if progress periods can be aligned to company fiscal years as we do for SECR.
I think at the moment we still are staying with the kind of the periods that are identified in the kind of ESOS legislation, partly given the challenges that there are a myriad of different company accounting years that you would have to satisfy, particularly where it will be an undertaking will be a mix of group and individual subsidiaries that may have different accounting years. But I think it's something that we're kind of interested to look into. There are kind of options in terms of how you kind of calculate the 12 months of data that you use for your SEC or TEC calculation. So there are kind of options to link that better to your company accounting years. You know, the kind of the 12-month continuous period, it needs to include the qualification date, so the 31st of December 2022, but you can frame that 12 months around your company accounting year. So there are options to link better your data collection with your company accounting years. But as I said, there's also challenges in terms of how you would have one approach that meets all the different deadlines that different companies have, and for example links to some other schemes that have specific deadlines, like the emission trading scheme has 31st of March deadline for everyone. So there are swings and roundabouts there that we're keen to kind of look at how we can manage those and streamline things where it makes sense.
Thanks, Gary. A couple of questions for Matt, I think now. So somebody has said lead assessors will need to guide customers on this. Is there a beta test we can use or send to them? And when will the system go live for preloading info in readiness for full completion?
So the first part of that question is around whether there's a demo site. So we are conducting a private beta now, and I believe there's probably a number of people on this call that are part of that. If there's, I think it'd be useful to gather feedback through this webinar on whether any further demos or test opportunities are warranted or needed. So it'd be interesting to collect feedback on that, Marie, actually. But at the moment, we started the private beta this week with a set of users that are working their way through, and we are, noting feedback from that. The second part of the question was, I can't remember what the second part of the question was. Sorry.
No worries. When will the system go live for preloading info in readiness for full completion?
Okay, sorry, apologies. So it's not so much that the system will go live to preload data. It's more that we are going to make templates available that can be completed in advance. So there were three things I presented. The first was around users and organizations. We're in the process of building an online form that can just gather that data in advance of the service going live. So we appreciate the service is not live yet. It's got a number of steps to go through before it can go live. So we're hoping that to help that process once it does go live, to pre-gather the information around contacts and organizations, probably through like an MS form online. And that will enable us to then load that data, structured data into the service in advance and have it pre-verified, which essentially just speeds up the process for us and for you as participants. The other thing was around the organization data, that we will be providing the template to enter that data into, which is the CSV file. That can be completed offline in advance of the service going live. And then at the point where the service is live, you've got the file ready to upload at that relevant point in time. So it's not so much that the service will be available to preload data, it's more that you can be prepared with the data in the correct format in advance. The energy data was the third one. We can share screenshots on that. I think myself and Ella both shared some screenshots about the energy data. And the screens align really closely with the legislation and the annexes that you would have been able to see online. So we can share that data in advance so you can see the format and the type of data that's needed through the guidance that will help you have your data in the right format, and also gives you an opportunity to make sure that there's, if there's gaps in that data, you can ask in advance of the service being available to do that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Matt. So the next question, not about IT, it's do all the opportunities identified in the audit have to be included in the action plan?
No, is the short answer. The slightly longer answer is that participants can choose which recommendations they want to include in that action plan, and it's really a way to help guide organisations to make those choices to put into practice the most useful recommendations from their ESOS assessments.
Just to add, there's kind of fuller kind of detail in section 12 of the guidance on action plans, including that you can also bring in elements that weren't part of your ESOS audit because they may have come in through other directions. So your action plan should set out, if the actions are included in your ESOS recommendations, but you can also bring in the wider things that give you an indication of what is the totality of the savings that your action plan is driving.
Thanks, Bo. So somebody else is asking, are you now saying that participants need an independent auditor to provide reports on 95% of all buildings or operations as opposed to a selection as previous years?
So I think look at the sampling guidance in terms of you need to have sampling that is representative of all the energy that is necessary to show at least 95% of your TEC, total energy consumption. So you need to, if you are a multi-site business, you need to say why you sample things and why you've sampled not others, because I think we recognise that it may not be proportionate to kind of have a detailed audit of every single site.
So that's the same.
But it needs to be representative.
It's the same as in the previous phase in terms of the sampling. The difference is it's now 95% rather than 90%.
Thanks both. So the next question is, can you clarify how to determine the energy intensity ratio for industrial processes?
Thanks, Marie. So as an overview, the energy intensity ratio for industrial processes should be your energy consumption in kilowatt hours for the industrial process divided by the total industrial output for the processes using that energy. So some kind of indicator of activity. The actual indicator that you use will vary depending on what the process is. There is guidance in section 6 of the guidance as well, and that includes some worked examples, so hopefully that helps.
Thank you. So just a couple of questions about ISO 5001. With that compliance route, does the auditee still have to submit action plan and updates?
Yes, is the short answer. Yes, because it's still about using those recommendations to drive some action forward through the plans and the updates.
And if participants have 99.5% of energy consumption covered by that, is this treated as all energy consumption through the web form?
In terms of a route for compliance, sorry, I realise it's not you asking the question, Marie. My understanding is yes, it would be, but I might need a bit more clarification on the actual question. But it is all covered in. Sorry, Mike can come back from that. Hi, Mike.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of those sort of yet to be just fully worked through, to be honest. If you're sort of over 99.5, then we haven't set that represents 100%. But I think there's argument to be discussed as to, can you ever be 100%? But what I would suggest is if you're that close, you contact us and say, look, this is where we're at, and we can confirm, okay, that's acceptable as 100%, or no, you still fall to the 95, between the 95 and 99.9%. But yeah, it's not set out anywhere specifically. So let's have that conversation directly, and we can make a judgment call on that.
And there will also be elements of the IT system rounding up things or not on what level of digital place may or not be allowed. So I think we'll come back on that question as well if on further. I kind of thought we can give a bit more definition to the answer, or as Mike says, well, you can also go directly to the Environment Agency.
Thanks all. Still on the standards front, forgive me if I'm savaging this number, but will ISO 14068 be accepted as a route to compliance in the same way as 5001?
So ISO 50001 is the only ISO that is recognised in the kind of legislation. It may be that you need to kind of send us a further question in the detail rather than covering it now. But the legislation is quite prescriptive in terms of what EMS is allowed.
Thanks, Gary. So the next question is from a lower energy use user. Where you're a low energy user and there are no meaningful steps that can be taken to reduce consumption further, how should we address this?
I assume this is talking about the action plans and the progress reports. I mean, you can submit an action plan to say that no action will be taken if that seems like the most viable route forward. That's an acceptable action plan.
Thanks, Ella. So one about landlords. Is there any focus in phase 3 ESOS on landlords who own the buildings where significant investment is required to improve efficiency post-audit completion?
So I guess the focus on ESOS still is the energy that you as an organisation are responsible for. I think there are kind of other policies that focus on, I guess, owner-occupiers, landlords, like energy performance certificate, minimum energy efficiency standards. But I think it's certainly something we're thinking through in terms of those challenges for shared ownership, particularly as there are kind of myriad of different approaches to billing for that energy and contractual structures. But certainly something we're thinking about, even if it's not quite as explicit in this phase, where it's still primarily focused on the energy issue an organisation are responsible for.
Thanks, Gary. So the next question is around joint ventures, how ESOS will be applied to joint ventures. Should we think as one entity or should they be treated as separate entities?
I think we covered a bit of that previously, and it may depend on the kind of legal underpinning of the joint venture. So we can, there are kind of bits of the guidance that talk about ownership boundaries and JVs. But it may be for the organisation to kind of write to us or the Environment Agency to set out the specific circumstances of the JV and the ownership boundary. Because conscious JVs can be quite different as well in terms of the different ownership models.
Sure, thanks, Gary. So the next question is around LAs, which I'm assuming is local authorities. Considering lateness of guidance being released, the ambiguity in it, and the lack of support for LAs, what protections will be in place for LAs against mistakes?
It's lead assessors, unfortunately. So I think we picked that up earlier as well in terms of, as both we and Mike from the Environment Agency's perspective said, we'll work with the professional bodies and certainly look at other kind of further things that we can do both through the professional bodies and directly with the lead assessors to kind of pick up beyond where we've got to today and what's in the guidance. Don't know, Mike, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, I kind of understand the question. It links to many things because there's a lot of new uncertainty, perhaps, in terms of applying the new updates for phase 3. What I would suggest in every case, and this applies across any phase, if you as a lead assessor have got a concern or an issue or think, oh, you know, I'm not sure I've got this right, or you're worried, let's not talk about protection, let's talk about guidance and contact, and just feel free to contact us with whatever it is that you're worried about or not sure about, because, you know, it's what they say, we can learn from those questions as well, and we can then feed that back to the professional bodies if it's something that we need to share more widely. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't worry. What I would suggest though is if you don't contact us and then we subsequently find the error or the issue that comes to light post deadline, it's a slightly different matter, and it's always better to have the conversations before than after the deadline. So that's our response. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. I'm just going to hand over to Fiona, who's going to help divvy out the remaining questions.
Thanks, Marie. So we've got a question on this is creating lots of work for energy professionals, but I would rather focus on saving energy than regulatory compliance. Is it worth the opportunity cost?
So I think, as I flagged before, we think the kind of additional cost is worth the benefit in terms of what we set out in the kind of consultation and the response and the impact assessment in terms of the, you know, additional £1 billion plus of energy savings that we see the scheme giving rise to. But we do, as I also said, are thinking about how can we look at streamlining kind of asks for information across a range of different schemes.
Thanks, Gary. And we've got a question about whether lead assessors can set up an organisation account for a client. So I think Matt has already dealt with it, but you might want to just cover this point again so people are clear.
The question was, can an organisation add a lead assessor? Sorry, Fiona.
No, I think it's can the lead assessor set up an organisational account for the
Sorry.
organisation, and I think our view is no. It has
No.
to be the responsible undertaking that sets up their account, because they are the people that are legally obliged to meet the ESOS requirements, not the lead assessor.
Correct. Yeah, that's the way the system is designed.
And we've got a question on whether multiple reports can be used to make up the ESOS report, or does it all have to be in one document?
They might want to.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think from if we were doing a compliance audit perspective, you'd expect there to be one overarching report, but it can make reference to numerous other reports that you may have pulled together. So I think that's the logical approach. Obviously, we don't want to create additional work unnecessarily. So yeah, so don't duplicate reports, but make reference to them would be my suggestion, and obviously keep those reports together in your evidence pack, so they're all immediately available.
And we've got a question on whether there will be a requirement to upload the full ESOS evidence packs.
Well, I'll go with this one for now, but it's a general point. So no is the answer. The guidance and the IT is hopefully being designed to direct you as to the specific information that you need to provide in order to meet the notification of compliance. So there may well be other data and information that you're gathering together in order to identify your total energy consumption or significant, etc., etc. That sort of level of detail isn't going to be required to upload within the IT system, as I understand it. So, yeah.
Although some of that, the evidence pack should be kept by the organisation, because it may be subject to a compliance audit, as is the case now, where you're supposed to hold on to your ESOS evidence pack for at least 2 full ESOS periods.
Yeah.
So just because it isn't being uploaded doesn't necessarily mean we don't recognise it's important to have that audit trail. But we're also conscious that we needed to see a bit more through the portal than had previously been the case.
Thanks. And we've got a question on whether there are likely to be many changes to items in the notification when the portal goes live compared to the current guidance.
Hopefully not, would be the kind of initial response to that. And the guidance has been driven by what's in the legislation. So the portal should be consistent with what is in the legislation and the guidance. So we would hope not.
Just on
It's those are the things driving what's on the portal, not the portal driving what has already been published by way of guidance and legislation.
Thanks. We've got a question on why the lead assessor can't submit the notification of compliance on behalf of the client.
I think we've answered that one previously in terms of the legal obligation is with the client, not with the lead assessor. And certainly in previous phases, there were some occasions that we heard that some organisations may never have seen their ESOS report because it had all been handled through an assessor, which isn't in line with the regulations.
Thanks. And there's a question on whether lead assessors will have to set up multiple logins and 2 FAs to the portal, or can they use the same one for multiple submissions?
I can answer that one. At present, they will need to create a log on per account. But we've had a number of queries about this, so we're looking into it at the moment. But the way the system is designed is that as an organisation, you can have multiple, as a primary contact, you can have multiple organisations, but for assessors, they would need to be assigned separately to each account. But it's something we're going to take away and have a look at.
And there's a question on whether, on why there is no reporting update on action plans for the period of 5th of December to 2026 to 5th of December 2027.
Because I think we see that as covered by your next ESOS notification.
I'm not aware of it now.
Because
Yes,
that will be
the phase 4 compliance deadline.
And so we've got a question on, once an organisation is registered for phase 3 of the new portal, will that carry on through to the same portal for the annual report submission and the next phase?
that's the hope and expectation. We certainly don't want to go through user testing and another kind of digital build. And one of the things that we've also, ESOS is built on a similar system to the MET's manage your emission trading system reporting. So we also see benefits in kind of consistency approach to that and other schemes.
And will you give details of a helpline or email for digital submission of data? And if so, when?
So I'll come back with, so the helpline, if you're talking about the sort of generic helpline, that's already in existence for the Environment Agency. And I think we're sharing that in the slide pack. I think if you're talking about the connection to the portal, probably one for Matt to just confirm, but as I understand it, there'll be a web connection that will be posted on gov.uk within the ESOS pages of gov.uk, but the actual details of that have yet to be confirmed. Is that right, Matt? It's sort of the URL connection.
Yeah, if the question's about how do you browse to the sign-in page, the ESOS, the standard ESOS page on gov.uk will have in the text a link to that to the service once it goes live. Within the service itself, there'll be reference to a support email address as well, and obviously in the initial guidance pages there'll be links to an email address as well to ask for help desk support.
Thanks. So the next question is, will previous phase information also be published, or only phase 3 information onwards?
So previous phase information is already published to some extent on gov.uk by the Environment Agency, and it's already publicly available. But as I said, we're thinking about the kind of fit between the systems and phase 2 and phase 3 and earlier data, and I will come back to you on that. I think just to kind of, by way of time, I don't know if there are kind of one or two last kind of questions that are near the top, just because I'm conscious we're getting to the end, and I'm conscious. Unfortunately, we started for some people lunch hour, so if we haven't got to questions, we'll certainly look at picking them up kind of through kind of further answers via email potentially. But we'll just, if there were kind of one or two burning questions that had been uploaded.
So I'm just checking those now. I think we're getting into repetition. There's some points which people feel are important that have been covered.
Thanks, Fiona. I think, yeah, say that we've kind of covered a lot of ground, and it's been kind of really good to get those questions, and certainly for us to think about, as we are already doing, in terms of how that, for example, fits into the user testing and what further kind of work we might need to do with lead assessors and professional bodies, and also things like what further guidance might we, for example, need to do on the digital system, particularly because it will be new to some organisations. As set out in the slide, so there are kind of contact addresses there if you have further questions that you want to follow up, having thought about the kind of the last few hours. But certainly, I guess thanks to the teams both in DESNES and the Environment Agency for putting together the session, and certainly to you for all the questions that came in both before and during the event. Certainly been really interesting for us to kind of hear those views, and certainly will continue to engage, and, as we said, look to see what we can do by way of further info to kind of help facilitate organisations both coming to grips with the kind of phase 3 requirements, but also the new IT portal. And we'll certainly kind of, as mentioned, give an update when we're through the user testing and sign-offs and the system is live. Otherwise, I don't know if Fiona was or Marie, was there anything further in terms of wrap up?
Not
I
from
don't
me,
see
yeah.
any further questions, no.
No, not from me. Just to reiterate, thank you everyone for their time today. I'll go away and live down that I called a lead assessor a local authority in an ESOS session. But yeah, very grateful for everyone's time. And as Gary said, we'll circulate these slides and a recording of the session next week. Thanks, everyone.
Otherwise, thanks all.